To answer the question of how might education mediate difference and dominance, this short clip will explore one of the most discriminatory government regimes our world has ever seen, apartheid. It will concentrate on the effects of apartheid on the people of South Africa. Apartheid means apartness in Afrikaans, the language spoken by majority of white South African people. This South African regime saw people of coloured skin lives disregarded, devalued, and made out as less important in society, simply because the colour of their skin differed from white. It is also important to note that during apartheid, white race in South Africa was the minority. The black population was left with few rights, for example, not being allowed to vote or to live in communities of their own choosing, as this segregation system came to be the basis for the political ruling of South Africa. Racial segregation was by no means a new concept to the people of South Africa. It had in fact existed for well over 300 years, when Europeans started colonising the country. The appalling fact is that apartheid existed well and truly after the colonial system was non-existent. Apartheid only ended in 1994, a mere 7 years ago, after millions of lives were lost fighting for equal rights. Apartheid was, in very basic terms, about socially classing people due to different skin colours. White skin was seen as the socially accepted norm, or superior, and anything other than this was different. French social theorist Jacques Derrida did much research into how we define difference, and came up with a theory that to define difference, we must firstly understand what we are not. To be able to class something or someone as different, we must have an understanding of what they are different from. For apartheid, the difference was between white skin and coloured skin. It seemed that white South Africans genuinely thought they were creating a more stable and superior country by not tolerating difference between white and non-white. In 1950, the government legally defined 4 racial groups, and all citizens were classed accordingly. They were white, which was the dominant race, coloured and Indian, both races considered neither here nor there as they were not black but not white either, and black, the disrespected race. This shows the zone of difference between black and white. It was from the defined racial classes that people in the community were placed together and learned how to act appropriately in their allotted community. Totally separate living and working areas were created for each group. This was the government's way of keeping the cultural diversity that existed locked in one area of the country. Without interaction between different cultures, the community would have lacked diversity and differences in lifestyle and culture. How boring. White people may have felt privileged and proud of their homeland. Hendrik Verwoerd, South African Prime Minister at the time, was quoted saying, "If South Africa has to choose between being poor and white, or rich and multiracial, then it must choose to be white." The coloured, Indian and black also had a sense of nationalism, as they fought on the belief that South Africa belonged to all who lived there, regardless of race. As quoted in the Freedom Charter, which was a proposed non-racial South African agreement, "The people shall govern. All national groups shall have equal rights. The people shall share in the country's wealth. The land shall be shared among those who work it. All shall be equal before the law." I feel that the principle of apartheid has the potential to be taught to children of all schooling years. The following is an idea for how school students might be able to grasp the general idea and feelings that apartheid creates. It can be used simplistically or has the ability to go into the issue at hand deeper, the adjustment to be made according to the grade it is being taught to. Take a class full of students. Ask the students to form 2 equal lines and separate the 2 lines. One line on one side of the classroom, the other line on the other side of the classroom. An important note is to generically divide the students. For the purpose of this lesson, division should not be based on skin colour or race. This generic division is important as it helps to eliminate the chance of the focal point of the session turning into a lesson regarding race labels. Ideally, we want to be focusing more on how the notion of apartheid shapes a nation and a community, and how the people that have lived in an apartheid community felt, both the positive and the negative experiences. Once the students are divided, have an imaginary line that they must not cross. Once the students are set up in their divided communities, give one community of students a treat, for example an ice cream, and when the students from the other community ask why they are not receiving the same treat, explain that there is no valid reason, referring back to apartheid principles. The idea here is to help students understand the feelings that apartheid creates in a community. For example, the ideas of difference and dominance. I can imagine a probable outcome would be that the students receiving the treat thought that being divided was not all that bad, as they were given luxuries for just being themselves, making their sense of self a feeling of dominance and power. Whilst the view from the other camp may be one of resentment towards their fellow classmates, at the teacher, and frustration at the unfairness of the division and the handing out of these luxuries. As a reflection of the lesson, we might then ask the students to verbalise how they feel their local communities deal with the focal points of discrimination and the ostracising of people regarded as different. The general idea here being that we would hope the students would learn to accept and appreciate differences and diversities in their local communities, and also be able to understand the problems that any sort of discrimination leads to, not only in a community, but also in a nation.